Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Chicago-based jazz guitarist Kenny Reichert. We talked about his new 2023 album called Deep Breath. Coming out on Shifting Paradigm Records, this sophomore effort is a masterful showcase of his musicianship and versatility as a performer, composer, and bandleader. Born in Brookfield, Wisconsin, he began his study of classical piano at the age of 5, guitar at 12, and the rest is just good history. Enjoy this interview.
Kenny, great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Before we get into Deep Breath, you know, the whole world of jazz was thrown upside down. I mean, performing arts with COVID. So for the last 3 years, I'm curious how you survived it and how it's changed the way that you approach life now.
Oh boy, well, it's been a big change for me. So I was living in Berlin, Germany when the COVID-19 pandemic started. And actually, prior to that, I was predominantly traveling around Europe and the United States with a folk jazz duo project I have with my wife. And so that's what we did. We were performing musicians and we traveled. And when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, that actually stopped everything. We had to cancel all of our shows, and Germany went into a hard lockdown, and it was really hard. You know, it was a hard transition for sure, but it also was kind of a blessing in disguise because it kind of gave us both an opportunity to stop and reflect on, you know, what we were doing in our life and everything. And it inspired me to actually go back to grad school. And so that's why we moved to Chicago. I'm currently finishing up my master's degree at DePaul and decided to go back to school and do that to kind of open up doors for teaching possibilities down the road. But yeah, I mean, it was hard because it forced us to really, you know, kind of reevaluate how we live our life, but it also gave us an opportunity to kind of, you know, reflect on a lot of things that perhaps if we were in the grind all the time and still going, you know, we wouldn't have had time to perhaps, or as much, you know, opportunity to reflect on these, you know, changes. So, yeah, it was, I guess, a blessing in disguise in some ways, but still it wasn't easy.
So is Deep Breath kind of a symbolic, triumphant kind of return to the world? How does this release feel for you?
Yeah, so Deep Breath, a lot of the music on Deep Breath comes from reflections through a lot of the travels that I was doing, and including moving to Chicago. So the musicians on the record were musicians, with the exception of Alyssa, who I met after moving to Chicago, that I'd known for a long time. When I moved here and I had time to kind of start to process a lot of, you know, the traveling and places I'd done and people I've met, you know, I started writing a lot of music, and very clearly these musicians came to mind to perform this. So each of the tunes kind of represents different experiences or different reflections over kind of the past, I'd really say, decade of my life. And in a lot of ways, it's my first record as a leader in, is it 8 years, I think? So it kind of a return in a certain sense to leading an ensemble more actively and performing my original music in that way.
So let's go back in time, Kenny. Let's get an idea of where you're from and how jazz and music became your world. Talk to me a little bit about the beginning, you know, where you're born and raised, how these seeds got into you, some early influences as well.
Yeah, I'm from the Milwaukee area, so Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that is. And I grew up playing piano and guitar, and my high school actually had a really wonderful jazz program that I did not get into my first year. And I was kind of referred to a local guitarist named Roger Brotherhood, who's kind of a legend in the Milwaukee and Madison music scenes. And he really was a phenomenal teacher because I was his last student of the day, and he was the type of teacher that would hold me over for an extra hour or an hour and a half, and we'd watch videos of concerts together. And so my hour lesson was sometimes 2-3 hours, and we would, you know, just hang. And he really, you know, was so passionate about jazz that it was kind of infectious, and I started becoming very passionate about it too. And, you know, as I kind of left the Milwaukee area, I decided to pursue music as my main profession. So that was really big for me. And I went out to the East Coast for a little bit. I went to Berkeley. I did not finish there. I actually came back to Milwaukee after, where I met my wife, who's Italian. And this is where things get a little tricky because my mother is actually from the UK as well. And so we ended up then moving to London and Berlin and since in Italy as well, and predominantly kind of traveling around and playing music the whole time. But when I was in Milwaukee and on the East Coast as well, I led my own ensemble. I performed in various ensembles between Madison, Chicago, and Milwaukee. There's kind of this like arc in the Midwestern music scene between, I'd say pretty much Minneapolis, Madison, Milwaukee, and Chicago, where a lot of musicians kind of move between those four cities pretty fluidly. So it's a nice place to, interact with a lot of different people, see a lot of bands coming through, get a lot of ideas. And yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, where I come from and how I got into it.
So what was the first live jazz show you ever saw that kind of blew your doors down?
Oh, the first live jazz show. I don't know if I could accurately remember that on the top of my head. Oh, well, I know, well, there was a duo in Milwaukee, and I think they still perform around. They're two guitarists. One of his names is Neil Davis, and the other is Steve Heflin. And they used to perform pretty actively as a duo, and they're both just phenomenal guitarists. And I remember when I was probably, 15, 16 at the time, a teacher of mine took me to go see them perform one time, and I was just like jaw dropped on the floor, and I was like, oh man, like who are these people and how are they doing this? And it's grown from there. There's so much.
What is it about this process of being a professional musician that you like the best? I mean, you have making albums, live shows, production. There's all these elements. What is it that you look forward to the most every day?
That's a good question. I think for me, I love the whole thing, really. I kind of divvy up my practice routine into several different things that I like to address on a daily basis. Obviously, the cool thing about being a musician is that you can always learn something new, and you can always refine and improve what you're doing. So, it's kind of more about the process than it is about the end result. And that's something I just really love because, when you start to feel like you're getting, good at something, then you can kind of shift your gaze to something else and be like, wow, well, I haven't even thought about this yet. I need to start addressing these things. And then after you work on that for a few months, you shift your gaze somewhere else, and there's a whole new set of things to address. So that's a really enjoyable process because it's just constant exploration. And I usually try to channel that stuff through my compositions as well, because I feel like composing for me is one of the best ways that I can really articulate how I see the world. It's kind of just me using the medium of music to translate. I love composing. I love working on music. I love performing music because you get to share a space with people where maybe they're listening to you and maybe they're not listening to you when it's a background music gig. But you get to create, something really unique. And one of the things I think as a musician that's really special is you get to come in contact with a lot of different social circles. So you get to see a lot of different people, and you get to interact with a lot of different people, and you get to, musicians, whether it be like private events or, concerts, you just come in contact with so many different people from so many different walks of life, backgrounds, where they live, what they do. And I find it really refreshing. I find it really, it gives me a lot of inspiration to kind of just see how many different ways there are to live life. And we're all just doing our own thing.
One of the key terms that you threw in there was learn. And I think that's the big thing about jazz. It's all about taking that torch and moving it on to the next generation. What have you learned from the seasoned veteran pros that you've been around that you in turn have taught and tried to give the younger players that you get?
Oh, boy, so much. And, I still feel like it happens every time I play with some of the veteran pros where, there's a great bass player in Chicago, Clark Summers. And, I played a gig with him recently, and his rhythm, the conviction of his rhythm, it was infectious. It was a gig actually without drums. So it was just a guitar, saxophone, and bass. And, there are other times where you play with certain players that do, sax players that maybe have like certain harmonic ideas that they do. And, you're like, wow, I never thought of that before. That's really beautiful. But I think more so than anything, if there's one thing I can take away from all of this, it's to really find out what's important for you and to really try to discover, what it is that you like, what it is that you relate to. Because obviously there's all like the mechanical, musical, tangible skills that can always be improved. But I think Well, a lot of the veteran pros really have people that we look up to and continue to look up to, whether it be through history or, in modern time as well, is that they really have discovered a way to relate to music that is unique to them, and they've really worked hard at trying to identify what that is for them. And, in the world of jazz, we call that creating your own voice, right? But it's really crafting your own experience through music and then being able to translate that in the way that you play with people, where you listen, you're compassionate, you meet people where they are, and you make the best music you can, but you also bring your own thing into the mix, and you're able to be uniquely yourself in that context. And that's something I think a lot of veteran musicians have really figured out.
So if you could get into a jazz DeLorean, we get off the phone, it pulls up in front of your place, and you could go anywhere in the history of jazz and see a musician in jazz, who would you go see? Where are you going?
I could go see anyone perform? Oh, man. This, as a guitar player, this might be kind of a stereotypical answer because I think, a lot of people might give you this answer, but I would love to see Wes Montgomery perform live. I mean, we have a couple videos of him. Another one, Grant Green, too, but he's such a phenomenal musician, and I would have just loved to feel what it was like to sit in front of him when he plays guitar. He's just such an iconic figure in the lineage of jazz guitar playing. It would have been pretty cool to experience him when he was around playing, but fortunately I was born after that, so I missed that one. But yeah, I would have loved to see Wes Montgomery.
So everyone out there has a perception of you, Kenny, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, man. I'm just a person who plays guitar. That's kind of, I think that's how I see myself. I try to differentiate the things, but obviously music is a huge part of my life, and all I'm trying to do is hopefully make meaningful music to me, and hopefully other people relate to it as well. But I'm a human first, and then I'm also a musician. But I think that's music is definitely, it has been a big part of my life, and I think I have integrated that as well. So
Kenny, if anybody wants to pick up Deep Breath, learn more about you, live shows, anything revolving around your music world, where do they go?
You can go to KennyReichert.com. That's KennyReichert.com. And from there, you can see my bio, my shows, videos. You can order Deep Breath through my website as well. So it's out April 21st on Shifting Paradigm Records, but you can currently pre-order.
Excellent. Hey, Kenny, thank you for taking time out. Best of luck with the album, and I love Chicago. Send my best to the Chicago.
Will do. Thank you so much, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Berlin, Chicago, Kansas City, Wisconsin, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Kenny for his time, energy, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, find Neon Jazz interviews on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.